Hey, CityCast Pittsburgh, it's Michael Ziviak. While CityCast Pittsburgh works hard every day to connect you with the stories that matter most, I'm working in the background making sure that our listeners are connecting with the best that Pittsburgh has to offer. So what does that look like? It means meeting with the people who make Pittsburgh what it is. The business owners, the stakeholders, the decision makers. The Pittsburghers who put together those food festivals you enjoy, the concerts you attend, the exhibits you can't miss, and who make those candles your mom can't stop talking about. If this sounds like you, let me help you get your message out to the city's best audience with an ad right here on the CityCast Pittsburgh podcast and on our sister daily newsletter, Hey Pittsburgh. Shoot me an email at ads@citycast.fm and let's connect.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, a homeless shelter downtown is closing. Our state's only coastline could get some national recognition, and we're celebrating the trailblazing Pittsburgh artist you've probably never heard of. It's May 26th, the Friday News Roundup. I'm Mallory Falk, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with Hey Pittsburgh editor Francesca DeBecco. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
And audio producer Maria Carter. Hello.
Hey, Mallory.
Before we get into today's conversation, CityCast could actually use a favor from you, our loyal listeners.
Yeah, help us out.
We're surveying everyone to help make the podcast even better for you. You just need to go to citycast.fm/survey. It only takes 5 minutes. We timed it out. And if you make it to the end, you'll be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card. So there's something in it for you besides helping out the pod
there's
and
some
newsletter
new
squad.
Or something, right?
Exactly. So again, that's citycast.fm/survey. All right, on to the show. Maria, you've been following news that one of the 2 low-barrier homeless shelters downtown is closing.
Yeah, this is actually the Smithfield Street shelter. It's in the basement of a church, and it's really a shelter that has been open in Pittsburgh for a while, but is really meant to be for the winter months, an emergency shelter versus a year-round shelter. But this year, the county noted that people still had this need and let it stay open a little bit longer. But now that's changing. At the end of June, they're planning on closing that.
Yeah, I read that it hosts more than 100 people per night. So it's, we're really concerned about what's going to happen for those folks.
Yeah. And, I think anyone in Pittsburgh has probably seen more homeless encampments over the past year or two around the city when they're, driving and going different places, especially since it's the summer months. I think there's a concern that, those numbers could only rise in those homeless encampments.
An expert on our unhoused neighbors here actually said that people living outside is expected to increase by 50% over the summer. That's quite a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. And even, with these emergency shelters, one of the things is you have to be out at 7 a.m. in the morning, and so people are outside already a lot that are staying there.
So, Maria, you mentioned that the Smithfield shelter has been around for a while. I know recently the county opened another low-barrier shelter, 2nd Avenue Commons, but that filled up immediately as soon as it opened. And I remember, some of these encampments were cleared in advance of that shelter opening, but then clearly there wasn't enough space there. There wasn't enough capacity. And so it makes sense that there was this increased need for the Smithfield shelter and for it to kind of extend its term.
Yeah, actually, this winter, the county wasn't even planning on opening the Smithfield shelter. They were just, because the 2nd Avenue Commons was expected to open, which was new and expected to kind of, I guess, take its place in a lot of ways. But then there were delays, and so they did open it. And then, 2nd Avenue Commons quickly filled up, and there was still a need for Smithfield that was pretty much filling up most nights.
Yeah, and I should just step back and kind of define what low barrier means, which is there's just fewer restrictions than you might find at some other shelters. So I know it means, couples are often able to stay together. There aren't the same requirements around sobriety. These are spaces that people who might not be able to access beds in another shelter can go to.
I think in some of them, too, they're allowed to bring their pets.
Yeah, I know I'm pretty certain that's the case in the 2nd Avenue Commons.
So going back a little bit, what do we know about why it's closing?
Well, there are some reasons. One is that it doesn't have air conditioning, and they've been using some like window units and temporary units, but it doesn't sound like a pleasant place to spend the summer months, perhaps. And so, and can become more of a health concern over the summer too. So that is, the main reason. Business owners nearby have also complained about it. I think, during the winter, probably even when people have to leave at 7 a.m., they're seeking indoor spaces, whereas it's been beautiful out. They're, more likely to hang out outside, and business owners are saying they're seeing a decrease in some traffic. And so, they talked to the county about it. The county's like, well, we've taken that into consideration, but that's not why we're closing this. And, there will be other problems that come with it closing.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading some reporting from Kylie Kaczynski and WESA.
Yeah, she's done a great job covering this.
Her reporting on this is great. We'll definitely link in our show notes. But she was talking about the fact that this might actually mean that folks really get scattered farther, like beyond just downtown.
Yeah, there are also, I know there's at least one or two shelters in McKeesport and other places. And so that presents its own challenges for the unhoused population, because a lot of the services that they might want to partake in are downtown. And so the county's still trying to figure out if they will be providing transportation and, how that all might work. And it might mean that even though you're not seeing homeless populations downtown, you're seeing them more in other parts of the county than previously.
I think there's maybe been this sense of, okay, if I avoid downtown, if I don't want to see this, if I want to kind of pretend that this isn't happening, I can just avoid Market Square, I can avoid downtown. And that's not going to be the case.
And you're also not helping anyone by not acknowledging that something is there and that our unhoused neighbors need help. Let's talk a little bit about long-term solutions before we offer folks ways that they can actually help. Earlier this month, City Council unveiled a plan to provide unhoused residents with new longer-term accommodations. So this proposal includes transforming offices into dorm-style apartment complexes. That's, obviously all of these unused offices downtown. That's a good, use of that space. Building a village of tiny homes. Not sure where that's going to be located or if they've nailed that down, but that's an interesting idea. And constructing a long-term shelter similar to the one on 2nd Avenue. So we already talked about that's overflowed. There's a need for another one.
Yeah, and I think those are three strategies, that kind of fall under the rubric of maybe housing first. Pittsburgh talks a lot about transitional housing, and the goal of that is to help people get off the streets and really into a more permanent situation. Right. And even like when you say long-term, you're so accurate, Francesca, because 2nd Street Commons took 4 years from idea to opening,
right.
So if you look at it the same way, it's likely going to be a while. Even they haven't identified where tiny homes could go.
Yeah.
And those would be fairly quick in comparison.
Yeah.
And, but you've got to figure out the land and, utilities and all these other things.
Yeah, I think that's what's challenging is that, there's this focus on housing first and creating, better alternatives than a shelter that does not have air conditioning, but those aren't in place right now. So where do people go? People have these immediate housing needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the concerns about, rising encampment numbers, which aren't great because those don't have toilets and, all these things, and can be very unsanitary for the people living there, but also for the waterways, nearby neighbors, etc.
And as we've covered on the show before, there are not a lot of good public restroom options downtown. There really aren't, which creates challenges both for unhoused folks and for everybody who
anyone with a small bladder
to relieve themselves. Yeah, exactly, downtown.
So how can folks of the city of Pittsburgh get involved or help out? I mean, one thing I know my mom sort of always trained me with was just carrying some extra apples or bananas or something, or
granola bars, like non-perishables.
Yeah. So if you're driving by and you see someone who's in need, like, you never know, that might be one of the only things they eat that day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's always kind and, helps that person out in the moment. It doesn't really solve them being unhoused.
Yeah.
Even if you gave them a whole backpack full of food. So I think it's really got to be some of the longer term solutions and looking at it in a more comprehensive way. So my advice would be write your county council person, your city council person, and advocate for policies that could help the situation. The other thing is affordable housing a lot. There's a big connection between affordable housing and or lack of affordable housing and homelessness.
Yeah.
Because if you're on the edge of things, you lose your job, whatever, it's easy to go to being homeless. So, that would be another thing to advocate for.
Quentin here runs a sustainable clothing brand.
Hi there.
He's excited that his shipping company, FedEx, has set a goal of having carbon-neutral operations by 2040.
Impressive.
When an influencer tweeted about his recycled bamboo T-shirts, Quentin unexpectedly became quite popular.
I'll take it.
He uses FedEx to reach new customers around the globe while making Earth a priority. FedEx, where now meets next.
It's almost summertime. I think this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, is kind of the official start. And, Pennsylvania is not really known as a beachy getaway. Like, there's not great beach access from Pittsburgh.
Just a river beach.
Just a river beach. But there is Presque Isle on Lake Erie, which is Pennsylvania's only quote-unquote seashore. I went to their website and they have seashore in quotes, so they're putting themselves down.
Because it's not a sea by the technical definition.
Exactly, but you got the sand, you got the water. Have either of you been to Presque Isle?
I have. I went to Presque Isle proper once last summer, but I've been to Erie twice last summer. I'm a fan.
I have not been since I was a child, and I don't know. I think I need to make it back for a little day trip. It's a great option for folks in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I mean, you could fool yourself into thinking it's the sea. In a lot of ways, it is very sandy and beachy in lots of parts of Presque Isle. Or there are also, if you're into biking, it's a nice flat bike trail around there and lots of other stuff you can do.
It gives you the vibes.
Yeah, you get the vibes.
You got your beach towel, you got your beach read.
You might as well be at the beach.
Yeah. I haven't been to Presque Isle. I spent a little time on Lake Erie in high school. It's not the most beautiful or pristine area. Like you said, it gets the job done. And Lake Erie might actually be getting a really cool designation as a national marine sanctuary.
Wait, what's that?
So, yeah, when I first heard that, to be honest, I thought that meant like a sanctuary for marine life. I was like, did I miss the dolphins that hang around when I was at Lake Erie back in 2004? But it actually, and there are some national marine sanctuaries that are about protecting, endangered aquatic life, but others are dedicated to preserving historic shipwrecks. And it turns out there are a lot of shipwrecks off of Lake Erie.
Yeah, I put this in the newsletter this week. There are 35 known shipwrecks in Lake Erie, but there's actually as many as 196 vessels that have reportedly sunk there. So there is a lot to be discovered. And I think that's the main driving point behind making this sort of a protected space as a national marine sanctuary, is so that they can really get in there and discover it and, learn more about the history, I guess, pull out those artifacts from under the water.
So you want to hear something kind of cool?
Always.
Yeah. So Erie is super into its sunken ships. So they have a maritime museum, and one of the things that's docked there and in Erie is the USS Niagara, which was really important in the 1812 war when we were fighting the British again. And, Canada was all British. And so we were like, oh, gotta stop Canada. Anyway, but they actually sunk that ship.
Wow.
Like the ship, the USS Niagara, a few years after the war to preserve it.
Oh,
what?
Yeah,
Wow.
on purpose.
Is this like a well-known strategy?
Yeah, apparently, yes. You sink a ship and I guess you can just haul it back up if you need it again, and it's fairly well preserved.
But how? I don't get it.
They didn't go into the details of how to sink a ship with me, but they sunk it, and then I think it was 100 years later for the anniversary of the war, they brought it back up and started restoring it, and then restored it a few more times, and now you can go sail around it.
What a time capsule!
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think what's really neat about this designation is that, like, we're talking about this area's long and rich history of people having a relationship with, maritime environments. So I would love to learn more about the indigenous folk who first called this home, and then on to later, like you said, the sinking ships. But then also apparently it has a large prominence in the Underground Railroad. So that would be really...
The Maritime Museum didn't go into that. So I know.
See, this is why they're getting a designation.
But one of the things, just kind of I was looking up Lake Erie facts like one does. It is the shallowest of the Great Lakes, which is part of why there are so many shipwrecks there. The average depth, any guesses?
Oh, no idea.
No. Okay, 62 feet.
Are you kidding?
No.
That doesn't seem...
it's shallow, and then you got all the lakes, weather and stuff, and I guess the ship's going to sink there.
Wow. I did not know this history at all.
Yeah, visit Erie. Don't give up the ship, visit Erie. That's their motto. You'll see it everywhere up there.
Well, so, the Biden administration just took the first step toward making this official designation, I guess. Erie itself requested this designation a while ago. The process could take several years, but if it gets the designation, that means it would receive federal funding to help find shipwrecks in the lake and also preserve them, and then also boost some of the education around things exactly like you mentioned, like its role on the Underground Railroad. I'm curious, does anyone have any guesses when the first National Marine Sanctuary was created?
1972. Am I close? Do I lose on Price is Right rules?
You are very close. I don't know Price is Right rules to know whether or not.
Did I go over? If I'm over, I'm out.
You're under.
Yes.
Nice.
It was 1975.
Ooh.
You're so close.
So the USS Monitor, which was this Civil War era warship, survived the battles, but then sank during a storm, was discovered in North Carolina. And originally the idea was to protect this shipwreck, to learn from it, to preserve everything that had gone down with the ship. But then they discovered that there was this artificial reef that had grown around it. And so it's also protected partly as a way to study the marine environment of this wreck site, to see what happens, what grows around these shipwrecks.
Stay tuned, Erie.
Yeah, so stay tuned, Erie. Maybe there's a whole world in your depths. In your shallow depths, I guess we learned.
Why does that sound poetic? So, those of you who read the Hey Pittsburgh newsletter know that I run a historical feature every Monday. And this Monday happened to be my birthday. So I shined...
Happy birthday.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. So I shined a spotlight on a person of Pittsburgh's past who actually shares my birthday. Have any of you ever heard of Mary Cassatt?
No, not until I read the newsletter.
I was going to say I did when I edited the newsletter, but before that I had never heard this name.
Yes. So I hadn't heard of her either until I researched her. She was a suffragist and an impressionist painter who was born in Allegheny City 179 years ago. So this was before Allegheny City was annexed into the city of Pittsburgh. And she is known for her endearing portraits of everyday women and mothers tending to their children. She uses these lively tones and beautiful color harmonies. And this was actually a radical display of familial moments for its time. She sort of captured women nurturing their children, but also, with that, working unpaid home labor,
know?
So
it was radical because it wasn't the formal sitting in a family group setting.
And there really wasn't any ordinary sort of depictions of women in paintings like that. And it showed them, bathing their babies. There's one I'm thinking of them like feeding ducks in a boat.
Aw, that sounds cute.
Yeah, it is very charming and sweet. But it's interesting because she never married or had kids. So she was really, depicting something that she didn't even have herself, but she, created this story of women through her paintings.
How common was it to have, to be a female artist at the time? I always think of a lot of those artists as men.
So it wasn't really that common, but around her time, this is sort of like the first wave of feminism, and they're starting to have more opportunities. So let me go back a little bit into her Pittsburgh roots, and I'll share more of that. Cassatt, she grew up in an upper middle class family here in Allegheny City on the north side. Her father was a stockbroker, and her brother Alexander actually later became the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. So they were pretty well off, which, contributed to her privilege of eventually, having access to the arts. And she was very serious about becoming an artist. So she began studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia at just 15. So, there was some accessibility, but by 1866, she actually left the academy because she was so irritated by the attitude of male students and teachers. They just weren't moving fast enough for her. They were, sort of minimizing the skills of women, and women weren't even allowed to use live models.
Ugh.
What was the reasoning there? They were too delicate to be around
live people.
Oh, dear women.
It's only fruit for you.
I have no idea, honestly. I mean, I don't know what their reasoning was, but it seems pretty absurd. So she decided to study on her own. She said, "Peace out, Pennsylvania." Her mother and her family friends accompanied her to Paris, where she studied privately with artists. That was still a little bit hard to get into the scene there as a woman, so she had to study privately. She couldn't go to the schools.
And did her mother have to come with her as a chaperone
Yep.
too?
Yeah,
okay,
she
wow.
was the chaperone.
Old school. No study abroad.
But she attained a permit to be a copyist at the Louvre. So I think that's really interesting. That just means that she can sit and study and paint and copy those paintings. And by 1877, she was invited by, you may recognize this name, Edgar Degas, to show her work with the Impressionists, or what they called the Independents. And these people, their work was revolutionary and the genesis of modern art, we could say.
It's kind of interesting thinking about her journey from Allegheny City, the Pittsburgh region, to France, to then become an Impressionist painter, because shout out to producer Elizabeth Kama. I learned this from her. But apparently in the early 1900s, there were a lot of artists, including Impressionists, who were really drawn to Pittsburgh because there was this fascination with kind of capturing urban beauty. And they were really inspired by, we've all heard these stories about in Pittsburgh, you needed to have the streetlights on all day because it was so smoggy and polluted and dark that you couldn't see. And that it created kind of this
landscape.
For people living here, a hellscape, but for artists, something really
a
visually
natural twilight sort of.
Yeah. And just something really visually compelling to try to capture, the look of the smog. I think the Carnegie Museum had an exhibit several years ago that included some of this artwork. So it's just interesting to think about her kind of making this journey to France. And I think there were French artists and artists kind of from all over who came here to study our landscape. But obviously she was, also capturing something really different. These, these beautiful scenes of motherhood, which, is a different vibe than a smoggy street at 9 a.m. So, we just established none of us had heard of her until, Francesca, you went on this deep dive. Is there anything in Pittsburgh that's honoring her? Is she, considered a local hero at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So there is a historical marker on the north side. And the wild thing about this is that I have probably passed this plaque 1,000 times, but I never noticed it. It's at the corner of Ridge Avenue and Allegheny Avenue, over by like CCAC's campus, but headed towards the North Shore T station. It's a shame because it's not actually accessible to like get to. It's overgrown with weeds and shrubs, and it's sad. And no wonder why I never noticed it. I'd love to see it move to a more accessible location or cleaned up. Just so more people know about Mary Cassatt.
Okay, so this plaque, if you do a little bushwhacking, it sounds like you
Bring a machete.
But can we actually see her paintings here in Pittsburgh? Are they on display anywhere?
So surprisingly, and unfortunately, none of her pieces are in our museums.
Wow.
I know. I'm like,
Someone bring Mary to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, bring her back. Yeah.
Bring her back to the sexist state that she fled.
Right. You can, however, find some of her pieces on the Carnegie Museum of Art website. This is kind of neat. One painting, it's titled A Portrait of the Artist's Mother, is accompanied by an audio step-by-step guided meditation, like a stillness meditation. And then another one titled The Banjo Lesson is accompanied by music from the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra. They're pretty cool. We'll put those links in the show notes.
That seems so interactive. I really like that.
Yeah. You guys know I get romantic about Pittsburgh things, but to take... Right. But take this story as a lesson to keep your eyes open for the magic in the mundane. You could pass something 99 times and finally notice its beauty on the 100th time.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Music is by Benji. Megan Harris is our host. Maria Carter is our audio producer. Francesca DeBecco writes our newsletter. And I'm the lead producer, Mallory Falk. And last thing, don't forget to fill out that listener survey. It's your chance to win $250. You can find it online at citycast.fm/survey. We will be off on Monday for Memorial Day, but we'll be back on Tuesday with more news from around the city. Have a great long weekend. That's the perfect end.
Yeah, I've got nothing to say.
Wrap it up.